Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are not just scratching the surface. We're basically peeling back the wallpaper of reality itself.
Yeah, we really are. It's definitely a departure from our usual deep dives into, policy papers or tech reviews.
Right, exactly. We've got a stack of sources today that are, quite frankly, going to sound pretty intense.
Oh, absolutely. Today we're stepping into a worldview that blends metaphysics, alternative history,
Mm.
and what you might call spiritual physics.
Spiritual physics, yeah, I like that term,
Yeah.
because we are looking at documents that claim the world. You see the solid objects, the institutions, the political movements, the things you can actually touch and feel. None of that is the real reality.
Right, it's a mask,
Yeah,
it's dense, it's provocative, and it really challenges the very ground you're standing on.
it does. The central thesis here is just mind-bending. The sources argue that the world is not made of solid objects, but it's made of vibrations.
Vibrations, yeah.
And more importantly, that there is this hidden machinery controlling modern life through entirely invisible means.
Frequencies.
Right, frequencies. And we aren't just talking about radio waves or Wi-Fi here. We are talking about a system designed to keep us, as human beings, fundamentally out of tune.
Out of tune. Yeah, that is the core of it. The argument isn't just that physics is vibrational, which, is a standard scientific view that pretty much any quantum physicist would agree with, but that there is an intentional metaphysical architecture of control built on top of that physics.
An architecture of control, that's a heavy phrase.
It is. The sources describe a world where our biological rhythms, our emotions, and even our spiritual states are being actively managed.
Yeah.
Managed by frequencies we can't see, but that we definitely absolutely feel.
And it's an explanation for that pervasive sense of exhaustion, right?
Yeah.
That anxiety that just seems to define modern life for so many of you listening.
Exactly. It's fascinating and honestly a little terrifying once you get into the weeds of it.
It really is. I mean, we're talking about everything from the tuning of the music we listen to the flickering of the lights in your office, all the way up to these psychic entities called egregores that supposedly feed on our emotions.
Yeah, so we should probably introduce the sources properly before we get too far ahead of ourselves.
Good call. So we are pulling from two really heavy articles published by Axis of Truth. One is titled Frequencies, the Invisible Language of Creation.
And the other is Egregores, the Invisible Architects of the Modern World.
Right. And just to set the stage for you listening, these texts are not light reading.
Not at all. They are incredibly dense. They combine terminology from physics like resonance, oscillation, destructive interference with religious concepts.
Specifically drawing from Quranic theology, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And then they weave in alternative history regarding pre-Adamite civilizations. It creates this unified theory of reality that tries to explain why the modern world feels so draining.
And our mission today is to decode this. We want to understand the connection between the frequencies we encounter daily, the lights, the sounds, and these entities the source calls egregores.
Because on the surface, LED lights and ancient demons don't really seem to have much in common.
Right, you would think so. But the text argues they are part of the exact same ecosystem.
They do.
Yeah.
But before we jump in, we really need to do our usual tone check.
Yes, crucial point here.
We are acting as unbiased reporters of this text today. We are not here to endorse the existence of pre-Adamites or egregores as objective, peer-reviewed scientific fact.
Exactly. We aren't telling you this is the absolute truth of the universe. We are strictly exploring the worldview presented in these specific documents.
Right. We want to see how this particular philosophy constructs its argument. We are stepping into their reality for the next hour to see what it looks like from the inside.
Perfect. So let's unpack this. Let's start with the fundamental premise. The source flat out says everything is frequency. Now, we hear this a lot in New Age circles, right? Good vibes, bad vibes. But the text seems to mean something much more literal than just a mood.
It does. It starts by completely dismantling the illusion of solidity. The author points out that we imagine the world as a physical theater of objects and substances.
Like we think a table is solid because our hand stops when we touch it.
Right, basic sensory feedback. But beneath that sensory experience is what they call the older truth. Every atom, every organ in your body, every thought you have, and every intention is actually a frequency structure.
It's empty space vibrating at a specific rate.
Exactly. It's all just vibration.
I really like the analogy they used that we aren't touching the world so much as we are tuning into it.
Oh, yeah, that was a great way to frame it.
Like our senses are just a biological radio receiver picking up a specific station. And if you change the dial, the reality changes.
Precisely. The text has this great quote, "We are frequency structures interacting with a frequency environment." Think about that for a second. If you were a structure of vibration, if you were essentially a complex song or a waveform, then you are susceptible to resonance.
Meaning you can be altered by other waveforms.
Exactly. You can be tuned, you can be dissonant, you can be harmonized. And, crucially, you can be jammed.
Jammed. That's where it gets sinister. And the source claims this isn't just poetic metaphor. They say it's physics, biology, and psychology all rolled into one.
Yes.
But here is the kicker. They claim this knowledge is hidden on purpose. Because if everyone understood this, the world would look very, very different.
Right. The source argues that frequency science is often dismissed as New Age woo, or actively ridiculed by mainstream institutions to keep people away from it.
But the text asks a very sharp question. They say, why mock what is simply measurable vibration?
And the answer they give is all about power. They argue that if you understand frequency, you understand influence. And if you understand influence, you understand control.
They call it a frequency cage.
A frequency cage, yes. The idea is that if humans realized they were energetic beings, they could step outside the theater.
But because we think we are just flesh and bone in a solid physical world, we miss the mechanism of control entirely. We're looking for chains made of iron, but the chains are actually made of sound and light.
It's like being in a prison where the bars are made of specific sound waves. If you don't know that sound can act as a barrier, you walk right into them and bounce off, thinking it's just how the world naturally is.
You don't even acknowledge the bars exist, so you never try to dismantle them.
You can't break what you can't perceive.
So let's talk about the bars of this cage. The source gets very specific about what they call weapons of misalignment.
They do.
And the first one is something I listen to every single day. In fact, everyone listening to us right now is constantly exposed to it: music.
This is a classic theory in this space, but the source doubles down on it with some really interesting historical context. It's the battle between 440 hertz and 432 hertz.
Break that down for us, because to the average person, an 8 hertz difference sounds like absolutely nothing. What is the actual functional difference here?
So hertz is just the measurement of how many times a wave cycles in 1 second.
Right.
The source claims that historically, before modern standardization, instruments were often tuned to natural resonant frequencies, often centered around A equals 432 hertz.
And they argue this pitch aligns with cosmic harmonics, right? Planetary rotation, sacred geometry.
Yes. The claim is that 432 hertz creates a biological ease. It feels rounder, warmer. You can actually find comparisons online where people play the exact same song in both tunings.
I've seen those videos.
Yeah, and even without knowing the physics, people often describe the 432 hertz version as feeling inside the body, whereas 440 hertz feels like it's hitting the front of the head. It's more aggressive.
So what happened? Why did we switch the entire world to the aggressive one?
Well, the global standard was shifted to 440 hertz around the mid-20th century. The International Organization for Standardization, the ISO, locked it in during the 1950s.
Okay.
Now, the official story is just that orchestras needed a standard so they could travel between countries without sounding off-key with each other. It was just logistical.
Makes sense on paper, but the source says otherwise.
The source alleges this wasn't an accident or an arbitrary logistical decision. They claim it was a deliberate move by institutions specifically referencing the Rockefeller Foundation and military research into acoustic distress, who were interested in mass social engineering.
That is a massive accusation. They are saying the standard tuning of almost all modern music, what's on the radio, your Spotify playlists, the jingles and TV commercials, all of it is designed to agitate us.
Slightly agitate is the key phrase here. It's not enough to make you scream and cover your ears.
Right, because if it were that obvious, we'd just turn it off. We'd reject it.
Exactly. It's subtle. The text says 440 hertz creates a subtle tightness in the emotional tone and actually affects the water structure in our cells.
A subtle tightness.
Yeah. It's like wearing a shirt that is just slightly too tight around the neck. You might get used to it, you might forget it's there, but your nervous system is constantly sending a low-level danger signal to your brain.
And what is the end result of that slight tightness across an entire population?
A population that is chronically slightly misaligned. The source argues that if you are just a little bit agitated, a little bit tense on a cellular level all the time, you are much easier to influence.
You're easier to distract.
Yes. You are less likely to access deep states of intuition or spiritual connection because your baseline vibration is just off. You're constantly looking for relief.
It's the difference between a smooth ride and a car that has a slight rattle in the engine. You might get used to the rattle, but it wears you down over a long road trip. It creates this background hum of anxiety.
And it creates a dependency on external stimulation to drown out that internal discomfort.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. If silence feels uncomfortable because your internal frequency is jagged, you will turn on the TV. You will scroll social media. You will actively look for noise to drown out the dissonance.
Because the silence actually forces you to feel the misalignment.
Exactly. But music is just one layer of this. The source goes even harder on lighting.
Oh, the LED and neon lights section. I think everyone has intuitively felt this. You walk into a big box store or a hospital, and you just feel drained within 20 minutes.
The source calls this an assault on the senses. They specifically target modern LED and neon lighting. The mechanism they describe here is flicker.
Flicker.
Yes. These lights flicker at a speed the conscious mind misses. You don't see it flashing like a strobe light at a dance club, but your nervous system perceives it. The optic nerve is registering the on-off pattern thousands of times a second.
So your brain thinks the light is perfectly steady, but your actual nerves are registering a high-speed strobe light. That sounds incredibly exhausting for the brain to process in the background.
It is. It creates a massive processing load. The source claims this disruption affects circadian rhythms and melatonin, which, to be fair, we know from mainstream science is entirely true. Blue light toxicity is a well-documented phenomenon now.
Right. Doctors tell you to put away your screens before bed for that exact reason.
Exactly. But the source goes further than just sleep disruption. They say it disrupts heart coherence. They argue that environments like supermarkets, schools, and office buildings use this specific lighting to induce a state of compliant dullness.
Compliant dullness. That is such a dystopian phrase. It hits so hard.
It really paints a picture.
It's like they want you awake enough to do your spreadsheets or buy your groceries, but not awake enough to think deeply or feel deeply. You're just a zombie pushing a shopping cart.
And it fits perfectly into their broader theory of the frequency matrix.
Let's talk about the matrix.
The expert in the text argues that humans evolved in harmony with natural frequencies. The Schumann resonance of the earth, the sound of wind in the trees, the full spectrum light of the sun and open fire.
The things our bodies recognize as safe.
Right. But now we are bathed in what they call an electromagnetic fog. Wi-Fi, 5G, Bluetooth. The source says we are swimming in a thick soup of discordant frequencies that we were never evolved to withstand.
It's sensory overload, but on an entirely invisible level. You can't see the Wi-Fi signals in your house, but if you could, the air would probably look like thick gray smog.
That's a brilliant analogy. If we could see EMFs, we'd realize we are walking through a blizzard of chaotic information constantly.
And that overload serves a specific purpose in this theory, right?
It does. It keeps us in brain mode or reaction mode. It prevents us from accessing the deeper intelligence of the heart. But this leads us to the bigger, more unsettling question. Who or what is designing this system?
Right. Why would anyone want a population that is agitated and dull? Because usually we just blame capitalism, right? We say it's greedy corporations trying to sell us more junk or more painkillers.
But the text says the corporations are just the interface. They're basically the middle management of reality. The source introduces the concept of the egregore.
The egregore. I've heard this term floating around in occult circles or esoteric podcasts, but how does the axis of truth define it? Because it sounds like a monster from a fantasy novel.
They define an egregore as a collective psychic entity. It's born from human emotion, human focus, and human obedience.
Okay, so it's not a guy in a suit.
No, think of it like a thought form that gets way too big. It starts as just an idea, a nation, a corporate brand, a religion, a political movement. But as millions of people pour their energy, their attention, and their emotional weight into it, the idea gains a life of its own.
So if enough people obsess over something, that something wakes up.
Essentially, yes. The text literally says, once enough energy has been offered, that thing begins to live back.
You live back. Wow.
It develops survival instincts, it wants to grow, it wants to protect its own existence, and crucially, it needs to feed to stay alive. It becomes an autonomous, non-physical system.
This strongly reminds me of how people talk about the market or the bureaucracy. Like you go to the DMV and Nobody working in the bureaucracy actually wants to be difficult or slow, but the system itself seems to demand more paperwork to justify its own existence.
Exactly. That is a perfect real-world example of an egregore in action. The individual people inside the system might be nice, reasonable people, but the entity itself, the department, the corporation, the political party, acts like a sociopath.
It just blindly consumes resources and human energy to sustain itself, regardless of the human cost.
And what does it eat?
Us, I'm guessing.
Us. Specifically, our emotional resonance.
That is a terrifying feedback loop. So
Yeah.
humans create the egregore through shared belief. The egregore wakes up and feeds on the humans, and then I assume it actively manipulates those humans to ensure it gets more food.
That's exactly the mechanism they describe. And the source makes a very specific religious connection here. They explicitly link these egregores to the concept of taqut found in the Quran.
Tabkutkut, can you define that for us?
Taqut generally refers to false powers or false idols, anything that is worshipped, obeyed, or feared beside the divine. The source argues that modern society is basically a massive factory for these false gods.
So we think we are secular and rational, but we are actually participating in idol worship.
Yes, we are worshiping brands, political parties, and celebrities, pouring our absolute devotion into them until they become monsters that rule over us.
They describe this as an exchange. The egregore offers you something, right? It's not just taking your energy by force. It's a transaction. You sign up for it.
It is a transaction. The egregore offers you identity, safety, and a sense of belonging. It gives you a script. It says, I am a member of this party, I am a fan of this sports team, I am a loyal employee of this corporation.
It tells you who you are so you don't have to figure it out yourself.
Right. But in exchange for that comfort, it takes your sovereignty. It takes what the text calls your spark energy. It gives you a uniform and a tribe, but it takes your soul.
And here comes the satanic inversion part. This was a really strong point in the text that stuck with me.
Yes. The source claims these entities reverse reality. They operate entirely through inversion. So under the heavy influence of an egregore, virtue becomes vice. Slavery is rebranded as safety.
And light becomes mere entertainment.
Exactly. The source quotes the concept of the beautification of falsehood. The system makes the cage look incredibly pretty so you don't ever try to leave. It decorates the bars.
But egregores they almost seem like software, right? They run on the biological hardware of human emotion. But who wrote the software? Because software doesn't just write itself. The text mentions pre-Adamites. And I have to say, this is where I paused the reading and said, okay, we are going from alternative physics to full-on ancient theology here.
It is a very sharp pivot in the text. This is where we get into the alternative history aspect of the doctrine. The text introduces these shadowy figures called the pre-Adamites.
It sounds like something out of a sci-fi epic. Who are they? Are we talking about ancient aliens or something?
Not aliens in the extraterrestrial sense. The source describes them as beings of fire. This is a very clear allusion to the jinn in Islamic theology, though the text deliberately uses the term pre-Adamite to emphasize their ancient native presence on Earth long before humans arrived.
Okay, so beings of fire. The key distinction made in the text is that they are made of fire, while humans are made of clay and possess a spark.
Right.
Made of fire sounds very poetic, but what is the actual functional difference in this metaphysical system?
The text argues that fire consumes. It is volatile, it mimics light, it looks bright, but it is not the actual source of true light.
It needs fuel to keep burning.
Exactly. Whereas humans, made of clay, have the breath of spirit blown into them. This makes humans generators of divine energy. The pre-Adamites, or beings of fire, cannot generate this spark.
So they are empty.
Yes, they can only mimic it or, more importantly, harvest it from us.
So they're essentially energy vampires by design. They literally have to feed on us to survive.
By necessity, according to the text. Because they cannot create spark energy themselves, they became the masters of energy manipulation and frequency. They built the entire system of egregores specifically to harvest human energy because they cannot create it themselves.
They are the engineers of the human farm.
That is a perfect way to put it. The egregores are just machines. They are the combine harvesters. The pre-Adamites are the architects who designed the farm in the first place.
That is such a crucial distinction. And like any farm, it runs on specific types of fuel. This brings us to the mechanism of feeding in the text, because they don't just want any random energy, they want very specific flavors of human emotion.
They do. If we are the batteries, what charges us up in a way that they can easily consume? The source lists specific emotional states.
Fear, outrage, tribal pride, obsession.
Yes. The source argues that egregores survive on emotional resonance. They don't just want your passive attention, they want your vibrating attention.
A calm, peaceful person sitting in a garden is useless to them.
Completely useless. But a person screaming in rage at a television screen, that is an absolute feast.
The text had a really provocative point here about conflict. It says that taking sides is a trap.
This is honestly one of the most challenging parts of the theory, especially for people who are highly politically active or socially conscious.
All right, because we are taught that activism is how you change things.
But the source argues that the entity running the show doesn't care if you are pro-X or anti-X. It doesn't care about your moral stance or your ethics. It only cares that you are vibrating with anger or obsession.
So if I'm marching in the street screaming against a corrupt government and someone else is across the street screaming in support of it,
You are both feeding the exact same egregore. The conflict itself generates the energy. The polarization is the battery charger. The source says the system does not care which side you choose. It cares only that you vibrate at the frequency of the egregore.
that perfectly explains that drained feeling after a political argument online. You know that feeling. You haven't moved a single muscle, you've just been typing on your phone, but you feel like you ran a marathon. You feel totally hollowed out.
Yes, the source says you were literally harvested. Your energy was siphoned off.
It reframes modern political discourse completely.
Hmm.
It suggests that the culture war isn't actually a war to win anything. It's just an energy farm working exactly as designed.
And the primary tool used to keep that farm running, keep everyone vibrating at that frantic pace, is fear.
Fear as currency.
The source lists the types they use against us. Fear of poverty, fear of rejection, fear of death, fear of not belonging to the tribe. When you are forced into a state of fear, your internal frequency field becomes incredibly chaotic.
And when your internal field is chaotic, you're highly suggestible.
You react rather than think. You look desperately for a savior. And usually the savior you find is the very system that is causing the fear in the first place.
It's the ultimate protection racket. But the source offers an antidote here, right? It distinguishes between terror and taqwa,
Yes. Taqwa is a religious term, usually found in Islamic tradition.
usually translated as God consciousness or fear of God, right?
Yes, but the expert in the text explains it more deeply as awe. The idea is this. If you fear the Creator, the absolute, uncreated source of reality, you have no reason whatsoever to fear the created
He
systems.
says the created systems are ultimately powerless compared to the source.
Exactly. If you have true taqwa, the artificial manufactured fears of the system lose their grip on your psychology. You become, in a very real sense, fearless regarding the world because your awe is placed higher up the chain.
So it's about replacing 1,000 small, exhausting fears, fear of your boss, fear of the nightly news, fear of the bank, with one big protective awe.
And physiologically, the text claims that mental shift actually moves you from cellular chaos back to coherence, which leads us to the physiology of resistance.
Because the source says we have built-in biological equipment designed to fight this frequency war. We aren't just helpless victims waiting to be harvested.
Let's talk about the heart. We mentioned it briefly earlier regarding the flickering lights, but the source dedicates a whole section to the heart, calling it the forgotten frequency generator.
Modern science pretty much just treats the heart as a mechanical pump, a valve that pushes blood around the body to deliver oxygen.
The source argues this purely mechanical view is a deliberate deception. They point to research claiming the heart actually produces the strongest electromagnetic field in the human body. It's measurable several feet outside the physical skin.
It's something like 5,000 times stronger magnetically than the brain, right?
Yes,
So we are essentially walking around inside these invisible bubbles of heart energy all day.
we are. And the quality of that bubble matters immensely. The source talks about coherence. This is a term used by the Heart Math Institute as well, which is fascinating to see cross-referenced here.
What does coherence mean in this context?
When you feel genuine love, gratitude, or sincerity, your heartbeat variability creates a coherent waveform. It's smooth, ordered, and powerful, much like a perfect sine wave.
And when we are stressed or angry from watching the news,
The field collapses. It becomes jagged, weak, and chaotic. The source says the primary function of the heart is actually to perceive reality before the brain does. It calls the heart the seat of intuition.
so the system tries to keep us locked in brain mode, analyzing, worrying, endlessly calculating, because that bypasses the heart's natural wisdom.
Exactly. Because the brain can be fooled by the flickering lights, the 440 hertz music, the endless logical fallacies. The brain can be tricked by propaganda. but the heart knows.
The heart resonates with truth. It's the ultimate lie detector.
So if you can keep a population entirely out of their hearts, keep them stressed, angry, and trapped in mental loops, they literally cannot feel the lie anymore. They become numb to it.
And deep within that heart system, the text introduces the divine spark. This seems to be the ultimate hero of the story.
The spark is the human superpower in this narrative. The text defines it as the breath placed into Adam. Crucially, the text says it originates completely outside the created frequency order.
What does that mean practically, outside the order?
It means it's not part of the simulation. It's not part of the matrix of vibrations and sound waves. It's a direct piece of the creator. Therefore, the pre-Adamites and the egregores cannot consume it. They cannot hack it, and they cannot imitate it.
In fact, the source says the raw spark actually burns them.
It severely weakens them. Fire can mimic light, but it cannot generate it. The spark is actual uncreated light. The goal of the entire control system, the lights, the noise, the fear, the politics, is just to bury that spark under so much debris and trauma that humans forget they even have it.
Because they can't destroy the spark, they don't have the power to destroy something divine. They can only hide it from us.
Exactly. They drown it in noise.
There's one more biological element the source heavily stresses, and that is water.
This perfectly connects the physical reality to the spiritual reality. We are mostly water, and the source claims water is a frequency memory device. It literally holds intention.
I've seen those experiments, Dr. Emoto, right, where he labeled the water jars?
Yes, Masaru Emoto. The text leans very heavily on his concepts. Emoto would take jars of water and label them with words like love or hate, or he would play chaotic heavy metal versus harmonious classical music to the water.
And then he would freeze the water to photograph the crystals under a microscope.
Right. And the love water consistently formed beautiful, perfectly symmetrical geometric snowflakes. But the hate water formed these ugly, asymmetrical, chaotic blobs.
And the terrifying implication here is we are the jars.
Precisely. Since the human body is roughly 70% water, the constant noise of the world, the 440 hertz, the Wi-Fi radiation, the anger-inducing propaganda is physically changing our cellular structure in real time.
We are vibrating chaotically on a molecular level every time we doom scroll. Our internal waters are becoming those ugly blobs.
They also bring up Nikola Tesla in this section.
Right, they call it the lost medicine.
The source claims Tesla found that manipulating frequency could literally cure disease and restore cellular harmony, essentially resetting the chaotic water in the body back to a beautiful geometric state.
But according to the text, this path of research was deliberately buried to maintain global pharmaceutical dependency.
Because if you can heal people with sound and vibration, you don't need to sell them pills for the rest of their lives. It's a suppression of technology that could liberate humanity from the physical aspects of the cage.
So we have the problem clearly laid out. A frequency cage designed by ancient entities to harvest our emotional energy. And we have the physiology, a heart and a spark that can resist it, but are currently being heavily suppressed. So how do we get out? What is the solution? Because if we just stop here, I'm going to go hide under my bed for the rest of the week.
The source is very, very controversial here. It explicitly says the way out is not political revolution. It is not marching in the streets. It is not debating people online. It is not forming a new political party.
Which goes right back to the idea that fighting the system feeds the system. If you fight the egregore on its own terms, you just give it more energy.
Right. The real exit, they say, is entirely inward. They call it a spiritual exodus. You don't leave the country. You leave the frequency. You detach.
But what does that look like practically? The source gives some actual steps, right? It's not just think happy thoughts and ignore the world.
No, it requires immense discipline. Step 1 is withdrawal. Stop feeding the system your attention. Turn off the news. Ignore the current thing that everyone is absolutely outraged about this week.
Stop repeating slogans you didn't write yourself.
Yes. It's about literally starving the egregore of your mental focus.
That sounds peaceful, but also incredibly hard. We are so addicted to the noise, we all have massive fear of missing out.
That's why step 2 is necessary. Frequency hygiene. This is physical action. Reduce your exposure to artificial lights. The source says seek darkness. If you can, turn off your Wi-Fi router at night while you sleep.
Avoid dissonant, aggressive music.
Seek silence. Go out into nature where the natural Schumann resonance is dominant. It's about clearing the electromagnetic fog around your body so your nervous system finally has a chance to reset.
I really like the idea of frequency hygiene. It's like brushing your teeth, but for your energetic aura. You have to actively scrub off the digital grime of the day.
Then there is heart stabilization.
Yeah.
This involves breath work, deep gratitude, and daily remembrance of the divine. The goal is to make that heart field coherent again, to smooth out the jagged waveforms of chronic stress.
Because when your heart is coherent, the external chaos just can't penetrate your field as easily. You have a shield.
And finally, reclaiming water.
Understanding that your body is water and that your own prayer or intention affects it directly.
Yes, if you drink water with gratitude, if you bless it before you drink, and this is a practice in almost every single ancient tradition in the world, the source argues you are literally structuring the fluid that will become your blood in your brain.
You are intentionally drinking order instead of passively absorbing chaos.
And what happens if you do all this consistently? What is the actual result of this alignment? Do the egregores just die?
The source describes a state where the hooks of the egregores simply slip off you. They can't attach to you anymore.
Imagine Velcro. Velcro needs little loops to stick to. If you smooth out your frequency, there are no loops for the system to grab onto.
Because you aren't vibrating at their frequency anymore. You aren't offering them the fear or rage they need to lock in.
Exactly. If the egregore feeds on fear and you are vibrating with taqwa and profound gratitude, you are completely inedible. You become invisible to the predation mechanism, and your spark finally resurfaces.
And you become, in their words, ungovernable. Not because you are a violent rebel throwing rocks at police, but because the control signals just pass right through you. You don't react when they push the outrage button.
You become a dead zone for their manipulation. And the text strongly implies that if enough people did that, if enough people became dead zones, the entire architecture of control would simply starve to death.
It wouldn't even need to be overthrown violently. It would just quietly collapse from a total lack of fuel.
A very powerful image. The silent revolution. No burning buildings, no screaming crowds, just millions of people tuning out the noise and tuning into the silence.
It shifts the battlefield from the city streets to the human soul. It empowers the individual in a way that modern politics never, ever can.
So let's recap this incredible journey. We started with the idea that the world is a construct of frequency, hidden behind a convincing illusion of physical solidity.
We looked at the weapons used against us, the 440 hertz music, the flickering LED lights, the dense electromagnetic fog.
We met the architects, the egregores feeding on our polarization, and the ancient pre-Adamites engineering the human farm.
And we found the exit door, not in fighting the system, but in tuning out of it entirely and tuning into the divine spark within.
It's a narrative that deeply challenges us to look at our exhaustion and our daily anxiety, not as personal failings or medical conditions, but as spiritual injuries caused by living in a hostile environment. And more importantly, it gives us a clear protocol to heal them.
And that leads us to our final thought for the listener today. Based on everything we've read and discussed, we want to leave you with this question to ponder.
If every strong emotion you feel is potentially food for something else, and every conflict you join is just a battery charger for a system that doesn't care about you, what would happen if you just stopped participating?
What if you became a dead zone for their signals? Would the world change, or would you just finally wake up?
It's really worth sitting in total silence with that one. Maybe turn off all the lights while you do it.
Definitely. If you want to read the full articles, frequencies, and egregores, check the show notes for the direct links to Axis of Truth. It's a massive rabbit hole, but it's definitely worth the trip.
Highly recommended reading. Just remember to ground yourself out in nature afterwards.
See you in the next deep dive.